moment. Is it going? There we go. Good evening to the YouTubes. Good evening to everybody that's joined us on the Zoom. Welcome to Practical Tips and Tricks for CI/CD Success this evening with Zan. I'll let him introduce himself in a moment, but just a few things from us. First of all, next month, an evening with Kevin Henney, a celebrity almost in the Nordelf world. I've looking forward to it. Next Thursday, June 24th, 7:30, as usual, on the YouTube and the Zoom. Sign up in the meetups. All this month. I haven't got many of them left, actually. I think you've got 2. Part 6 went out last night. So yeah, 7 and 8 next couple of weeks. React Native Forkit. Building a React Native app, obviously, by the title, really, but it's all on GitHub, so you can grab it afterwards and have a play. Virtual Social Club, as always, on the Fridays. We are going to be potentially transitioning this to Discord, so get on the Discords. And on that note, in a moment, I will mention that as well. But first, hosted by you. We are always looking for the new speakers. I won't read the rest of the slide to you. That's laborious. But if you wish to hear from somebody, point us in their direction. We'll get in contact. Otherwise, get in contact with them yourselves and ping them up. Ping us a message on the Discord or the emails. A massive thank you to the User Story. They sponsor our, talking of Discord servers a moment ago, they sponsor our quarterly engagement prize, a £50 freshly minted Pumaroni voucher to the most talkative amongst you every quarter. Currently in the lead, I think it's Damien, so to beat him, to beat. Our sponsors, we're always looking for sponsors, and watch this space is all I'll say to that. A massive thank you to the people that have literally kept the lights on for the last, does anyone know how long it's been? It feels like forever, but 16 months, something like that. I don't know. It's been a while. Thanks for keeping the lights on, literally. But anyway, I'm going to get out of the way and let's find out how not to launch a rocket like that. Straight on to Zan.
All right, hello everyone. Let me see if the screen sharing works. I hope it does.
It does indeed.
Good. Yeah, so thanks for having me over. It's always a pleasure. And today we'll talk about some practical tips and tricks for CI/CD success, or as I like to call it, not failing with CI/CD, which is almost as good. Let's begin with a thought exercise. Imagine you're getting ready to ship something, ship some software, something you've worked on for maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months, maybe a few days, depends on how often you ship, I suppose. Anyway, you're looking at this big red button and you're getting ready to press it, which will trigger the kind of shipping deployment procedure. So yeah, you press the big red button. It has a nice audible click, like a nice mechanical keyboard, blue switches, obviously. And then it's out of your hands, hopefully not as dramatic as the rocket that Alex had in the introductory GIF, and more like something that NASA would put together. But anyway, you've pressed deploy, it's being shipped, and all you can do is watch it from afar and hold your breath, I suppose. And now it's up to you to really decide whether this is how this is going to go, right? One option is keep holding your breath until you go blue in the face. sweat a little bit and wait to see whether it blows up. Or you pack up your stuff, go home, or go to a pub when they open and enjoy your weekend, because it's Friday and it's 5 p.m. and it's time to go home, frankly. I don't know about you, but B to me seems rather more appealing. And the difference between the two, it all boils down to automation. How much and what kind of automation you have in place. Now, this is pretty universal and goes from releasing software to processes in general to manufacturing things in factories and yes, also agriculture. And while this talk is not about agriculture, I do like to compare software delivery lifecycle to growing crops. You constantly need to pay attention to it. You constantly need to keep putting work in order to one day reap the benefits out of it. Just like releasing software, I suppose. And just like with releasing software, there are many levels of automation that you could apply to your field of crops, for example. For example, crops this field this size, and it's a pretty large field that I'm showing on the screen for people who might not be looking at the screen, can be worked by humans themselves, by hand, essentially. And you might need, a few dozen, maybe a few hundreds of people to just kind of going through this, planting things, weeding things, watering, and ultimately picking up and harvesting the crops that grow. Every single day there is more and more work to be done, and it's a lot of work for a lot of people. Or you could add some technology to the mix, get some tractors, get some machinery, maybe add an irrigation system, which kind of makes you need a lot less humans picking things at the ground, and do it with more machines more efficiently. Again, even if you add like a number of machinery like tractors, irrigation systems, you're still at the mercy of some of the external elements with a field like this. It's an open field, so you can have a drought this year, or you can have flooding, you can have maybe insects or something like that, some disease coming and essentially ruining the whole thing. So it's still kind of working this in a wider kind of context, which is, even though you had a lot of automation in place, a lot of machinery in place, it's not ideal. You could go 1 or 2 or 20 steps further and put all the plants, all the crops into a greenhouse, for example. In a greenhouse, you do things, you grow things in isolation. And this allows you to control exactly the lighting, the temperature, humidity, everything that the plants actually need to grow, like all the way down to individual nutrients that are supplied to plants. And you can even have these super cool looking robot arms that I don't know what exactly they do, but I imagine what they do is they use computer vision to detect which plants are optimally ripe, pick those, package those, and so that you can sell them at a maximum profit per plant, which is, I mean, in my mind, that would be the only logical thing. Can you have too much automation? Absolutely. Will they turn into robot dinosaurs that destroy humanity and take us all to the Ice Age? Probably not. But an automation malfunction can definitely ruin your crops, as it can mess up your software processes or mess up your human processes in general. But the thing is, it's not the machine's fault, right? It's always us. Every software failure is rooted in a human error, and that's just the beauty of development. It's our fault usually, or always. Anyway, my name is Zan. I'm a developer advocate at CircleCI, and I'm usually the problem that exists between the keyboard and chair. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm quite active on Twitter. You can follow my ramblings and shitposting on @Zmarken, or you can email me with any more serious things at zan@circleci.com. I do also share quite a lot of sample code, that kind of stuff, on my GitHub, so you can follow me there as well. Anyway, today we'll be talking about CI/CD success. CI/CD is the automation layer that helps us build and release our software. And we'll be looking at a few things that you should always look out for or never ever do in your CI/CD setup. Anyway, I work for a company called CircleCI. We are the largest shared CI/CD platform out there. And we've been around for a few years. And we really focus on allowing and enabling development teams all over the world build software on whatever technologies, deploy it to wherever. And from just a couple of days ago, we've announced that we acquired a company called Vamp, which manages release automation as well. So we're soon adding that to our portfolio as well, which is super exciting. Anyway, we do it at a super enormously huge scale. But yeah, I've talked about CI/CD a lot, but I haven't actually mentioned what it actually does. So let's look at that instead. So CI/CD is obviously an abbreviation. CI stands for continuous integration. And essentially, the practice of automatically building and testing all the new changes to the source code that developers check into a shared repository. So, for example, you've got your application deployed on or you're working on your application, which is hosted on GitHub. Each commit you push to GitHub is then picked up by the CI/CD, which runs a set of scripts that you tell it which scripts you want, essentially, and runs a bunch of tests, unit tests, integration tests, functional tests, all sorts of different types of tests, scans, linting, static code analysis, security scanning, and ultimately builds that application for deployment, for releasing. Again, this can be a Docker image, this could be an Android application, this could be a static website. It doesn't really matter. This is like all technology agnostic. The way things are configured are essentially we at CircleCI use a YAML file to kind of configure everything, which sits inside of your repository in this kind of .circleci directory. You put a config.yaml. We basically specify what you want to do in terms of various jobs, which environments to use, and arrange those jobs in workflows. And inside those jobs, you basically specify, yes, I want to run these commands, for example. That's all the rambling that I'm going to be talking about, kind of what CI/CD is. If you have any questions, please do let me know. Yeah, if you have any questions, I can answer them. I'm looking at the chat right now, so if you have any questions, please do let me know. I might be able to answer them straight away. The other part of CI/CD is obviously continuous deployment. And that's the practice of taking the software that was built and deploying it automatically to the environments where we want them to be. And they can be like any type of environments, from testing, production, to development, to staging, yeah, any type of environments. And yeah, again, it could be an outlet such as infrastructure like Kubernetes, or maybe a serverless environment, or a mobile app. Again, it really doesn't matter. As long as you have kind of scripted this in a way that makes sense for you, for your app. You're doing continuous deployment and doing it well. So yeah, how do we succeed with this? The story is not as simple as because obviously releasing and building software is pretty advanced. So the story has quite a lot of dimensions and aspects to it. So we'll be looking at a few of those in the next section of the talk anyway. First and probably most obvious part of software CI/CD success is succeeding with speed. So most obviously, probably it's you don't want the thing to run slow. You don't want it to hold you back as you're developing. You want it to be as fast as you can essentially think, which is what the best CI/CD tools and setups actually allow you. But there is more to speed. So I mentioned time to run a CI/CD pipeline. That could be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour. I've had one that ran for like 12-ish hours, which was very horrible, and I don't recommend it. But ultimately, shorter, quicker tends to be better. Or it could be time to recover from a build that fails. And if you're thinking about how a CI/CD works, especially the CI part, CI will run all the tests, it will build the app, it will run any verification that you tell it to run. And if the app doesn't pass those tests, those checks, it will mark the build as red and failing. And your kind of speed that you're looking at might be looking to get that time to recovery from red back to green. Because ultimately, if you have a CI/CD setup, if your main or master branch or your trunk doesn't pass CI build, it means that you don't have the ability to ship that software, and that's a big problem. So you really want to get that time to recovery to as short as possible, basically. Or it could be something like a business aspect. So time to ship a feature. For example, you're adding a new feature. The business wants to add you a new feature, for example, like a new API support or a new website or something like that. Yes, it could be the clock starts ticking when the product manager hears of this. How quickly can the development team iterate on this, verify it, and then get it into the hands of users? That's probably not measured in minutes. That's probably measured in days or weeks, but still, shorter is better usually. And lastly, it could be something like time to onboard a new team member. We'll see about that like later in the talk, but CI can definitely also help us have the project more descriptive, because ultimately we're configuring all the build and deploy processes as code. People can actually read that and understand what's happening to the project, even though they may not be familiar with the programming language, the frameworks used. They can still kind of get some value and get some bearings, at least from the CI, at least. So yeah, running your pipelines faster, the first thing, the most obvious thing. There's a couple of things you can do. I've had like horror stories. I do have a talk about just that essentially, and it's about getting a build from like 8 or 9 hours down to low hours essentially, or less than an hour. And there are a couple of tricks that you can do. First one is use the resources that are the right size for your build. For example, use enough RAM, make sure that you're not running into kind of random out of memory errors. Again, RAM helps. all the CI services, most of them at least, that are cloud-based, will allow you to easily switch how much, what kind of resources you're allocating your builds, your builds. Or you could do, you could enable some parallelism, which runs your jobs. So I mean, unit tests, functional tests, integration tests, verifications in parallel as opposed to running them sequentially, and also split tests in an individual test suite. For example, functional tests down to like parallel subsets of those tests that kind of run obviously a lot faster because you're running shorter test suites in parallel instead. You can also utilize caching, which is essentially allow you to reuse parts of work that you already did. For example, dependencies. If you're using any language that has some kind of external dependency management, like Node.js, Python, one of the first steps you do when you're running a project is run npm install or pip install or whatever. And caching allows you to only do this once for as long as those dependencies don't change. You kind of store that, so they're a lot easier and faster to pick up. And yeah, just tweaking what gets run and at what point. For example, your development process might be making a lot of small commits to a feature branch, and a lot of those small commits that you're working on as a developer, you don't need a comprehensive test suite to run, but you really still need some kind of unit test coverage. So maybe you want to run unit tests, but not your functional test suite, which on the other hand can run asynchronously when you're running your like maybe nightly builds, for example, or whenever you're ready to ship, you're merging into your main branch. Only then you will run your full-on test suite. There is a couple of mandatory slides in DevOps talks recently, so this is one. Obviously, Ever Given gave us a lot of problems with the world's shipping, but also gave us a great example of what happens when you have a bottleneck that prevents you from shipping things. This famous ship obviously prevented us from shipping cargo from Asia to Europe and vice versa. And that was because it was stuck literally sideways in the Suez Canal and it couldn't move for a number of days. And it got so bad that some ships actually decided they were going to go around Africa instead, which was pretty wild, considering how big and vast Africa is and how relatively short the Suez Canal is. They thought, okay, they're going to take so long to fix this. We're just going to go around. But yeah, this is all about recovering from failure quickly. Because yeah, I mean, with Ever Given, it was like I think the cost to the world's economy was estimated like $400 million or $1 billion, some obscene amount in hundreds of million of something. Anyway, per day, yeah. To recover from failures faster, first you need to understand what's happening with your builds. You need to understand where the failure is actually coming from in order to fix that. Logs do help. And obviously, every platform, every language will have a different way of logging things, but run something in the verbose mode and make sure that you're capturing everything. And also, in CI, it can be quite hard to actually get the logs out. So make sure that you know how to easily access those logs. Maybe you ship them, you push them to an external server, or maybe you can do this in the CI tool itself, but essentially like store the logs so you can then use either grepping and like the normal command line utilities or utilities that you are familiar with to then sift through logs as you would on a local machine. The same goes with actual build artifacts. So for example, if your app is misbehaving, you have a bug, maybe you want to store that as an artifact and then kind of get the debug version of that you can then debug locally with more easily, more seamlessly. And lastly, which is one of my favorite features of CircleCI, and only a few CI/CD providers do this, they allow you to debug your builds as they are failing. So essentially, if you're running something in a Docker container or virtual machine, you can actually toggle an SSH mode, which allows you to SSH into that build, which ultimately is just a running container or a VM, and explore the state of the project in like after it's failed. So you can see, okay, we have some output here, we have some logs there, we have our half-built app there. What's going on? Let's figure out. Let's try running the commands again. Let's try running commands with some other flags or something similar to make sure that you understand the failure better. Once you understand the failure, it's usually straightforward to then go ahead and fix that and make sure that it doesn't happen again. But ultimately, when it comes to speed, especially when it comes to speed of builds themselves, it's really not a race. It's more. I like to compare CI/CD as an ambulance instead, because yes, it should go pretty fast, but it should not go too fast at all, because what you're carrying, what your payload is actually a signal which tells you whether your app is good or not, whether your app is shippable, whether your app is unworkable. Essentially, that's what your tests will tell you. That's what your scans will tell you. And yeah, whether app builds or not is a good proxy of whether your app will work with end users. And so the speed is an objective, but there is a balance to how fast versus how much you want to test, which obviously takes longer. And yes, lastly, if you see red lights on your build goes red, go fix it ASAP, because if you don't, the longer you wait, the more things you will have in your backlog that will make your next deploy a lot bigger and even more dangerous to deploy. So you'll be closer to that scenario A, where you're like nervously waiting for it to blow up, versus scenario B, you'll be just kind of on the way home because you're just deploying a tiny little change that you don't really worry too much about. Anyway, fix the broken builds and make sure that you're carrying a signal. That's all about speed. Speed tends to be, at least perceived, very closely to costs. And if you're using a cloud-based or a SaaS tool, then yes, this will probably cost you something, unless you're working on an open source project or a very small kind of spike. But ultimately, you're running VM somewhere and or some compute somewhere. It's not going to be free. So, do you worry too much about it? So there's several factors about this, and you really think about it. A lot of teams actually say, yeah, we don't want to use like an external service, because we can just host it ourselves, because there is an open source tool out there. Yes, of course, there is an open source tool out there, but it might cost you to set this up, and it definitely costs you to automate, to have a person to maintain this thing. And there might be constant updates required to make sure that this still keeps working for you. So yeah, this is all kind of cost trade-offs. But yeah, definitely understand how much you're spending. Like, are you running too many builds? Are your builds lasting too long? Are your builds not optimized? There are still valid concerns that will ultimately, if you're a manager, you'll probably have to answer to them. If you're an individual contributor, you probably don't care too much about them, but you might get an assignment to then kind of go ahead and reduce those costs, because yes, we're running a lot of things in a not efficient way. But then the other cost is, like not automating things. Can we do things manually? It's free, right? You just build it locally and drag and drop it somewhere, and it's going to run, right? Perfect. You don't need to automate anything. But then again, you have no verifications, no assurance that it's going to work on anyone else's machine other than your developers. And I mean, we've all been there, right? I'm not going to lie. It works on my machine. It's good. Let's ship it. Is a common thing the developers do say. But yeah, CI/CD setup does help you avoid that. But yeah, it usually does kind of come with some kind of cost attached. But no matter how much it costs you to run a CI/CD system, it's never going to cost you as much as a proper security breach might. So security breaches are never fun, and they come with all sorts of legal implications and negative press, and lost business, and lost customer trust. So that's usually where the real kind of company destroying costs come in. This image is obviously taken from Monkey Island, The Secret of Monkey Island. Someone commented, if it works on your machine, we'll ship that, and thus Docker was born. I have no comment. This is from The Secret of Monkey Island, where your character, Guybrush Threepwood, gets locked into this hut by a tribe of cannibals, and you keep escaping through a hatch in the floor, but they kind of keep increasing the security on the gate. And it's honestly, it's one of my favorite, most funniest moments in gaming ever. And basically, they start with this kind of tiny little lock on the gate, and then they kind of board up the whole thing, and then they add chains to the gate. Ultimately, they create this kind of bomb shelter type, nuclear bomb shelter type gate that says armed. And obviously you can still escape because their hut has a shaft that you can run through. But essentially, like, security is definitely something that should be off like a big matter of concern, and it should be on top of your priority list, whatever you're shipping, whatever you're building. And there are a few things that you can easily mess up and obviously easily avoid. First one is keeping the credentials safe. By safe, I mean keeping them out of the GitHub repository, and yes, pass them on to your CI/CD tool, which allows you to kind of inject them as either environment variables or something else as part of that build process. That way they are encrypted, stored, and only used whenever you need them. You can also, I mentioned, automate security scanning. So all the dependencies that your app is using, all their versions or their sub-dependencies, they can get automatically scanned. They are open source. They are proprietary services that do that. And they tend to be very easy to integrate, because, like, ultimately your list of dependencies is like a package.json or a requirements file for Python or Maven dependencies or whatever you're using. And you can also scan actual Docker images for kind of underlying dependencies in installed software. They might have vulnerabilities as well, especially if you're shipping Docker images as part of your software build. And lastly, you can go even further and kind of make sure that people have really, you configure privileges access to your various aspects, various portions of the build and deploy flow. For example, you can and obviously should not give your, let's say, AWS or Google Cloud or Azure credentials that you use for deployment to production to your job that does the building and testing, because why would it need that? Why would it need that? You just need it wherever you actually need to kind of touch that environment. So CircleCI has the notion of context for that. So they allow you to kind of split things between different jobs so that you don't share environment variables even within a single project for different purposes. For example, like your AWS credentials, they want to be kind of kept safe and secure, and only really the deployment job might use them, whereas the rest is probably good without it, obviously. And again, there has been some security stories, horror stories recently, where popular tools have been breached in a way that could be avoided by kind of clever CI/CD setups and making sure that access is to really set up in the way that it's whatever, only the portions of it that needs to have access to certain things have access, and the responsibilities are neatly split. So security is hard, but it's also just a checklist that you kind of want to follow. Next one is just understanding your tool, and yeah, I mean, CI is a dump. It's a dump plumbing thing, right? And what has it ever done for us, right? If you get a Monty Python reference, at least. It's more than that, right? CI/CD tools are constantly developed. I know one that is, but I imagine some others might be as well. And they have constantly added features and new aspects of the tool that you can use. And just know that whatever you're doing, you can always add more automation, and there might be features that allow you to do that with ease. For example, I mentioned the contexts in CircleCI, which allow you to kind of split credentials across different aspects of your builds, which is super useful. And there are also things that help with caching. There are also things that help with like speeding up your builds, understanding your builds through insights and so on. Really understand what features are available, read the release notes, read the kind of product announcement, have a look at the docs once in a blue moon. If there's things that's been added, there's usually something, whatever tool you're using, just make sure that you're on top of it and you're getting the most out of what you're probably paying for. And ultimately, that's going to help you have those kind of paying for software conversations as well, if you need to anyway. And the features don't really stop at just the tool itself. Sometimes you can actually utilize and communicate with external tools as well. For example, because like software isn't only exist in isolation, right? Even CI/CD itself, it uses at least some kind of repository and some kind of place where you deploy things to. So beyond the tool, you actually want to integrate with some external services. For example, Norfolk developers, you use Discord. You can actually have like build, deploy webhooks set up if you're kind of working on something, and notify people relevant to the build of new deploys, new builds, something happening in your CI/CD system. The same goes with Slack or many other kind of popular communication tools, like from email to text messages to whatever you might be using. To also, monitoring tools. For example, you want to tell your monitoring tools, hey, a deploy has happened. Maybe flag this in some way so that we know about it. And just really kind of understanding what you can get, what other service you can get your CI/CD to talk to, and so that the information kind of flows. We had a conversation with Alex about Jira and Atlassian before we started, and that's one example that's also pretty cool. Like you can show for each Jira ticket, for example, you can show, yes, this has been built in these commits, these branches, and these are the deployment environments, like testing, staging, production for a particular feature. And that's like a neat integration, for example, with CircleCI. And ultimately, like informing the people who need to know. For example, with communication tools like Slack, maybe you want to inform, maybe your development deployment flow requires someone to actually go in and say, yes, I want to approve this deployment. Maybe you can automate paging that person so that they know, okay, that person needs to go in and look at the build logs, look at the pull request and all the project things that they need to know about, and then click deploy. And you can automate informing them of that as well. Speaking of talking to people and informing them, it's not a DevOps talk if it's not also about people. Again, you need two things. One is Ever Given, the other one is people. And yes, teams are the core of any DevOps approach. And yes, CI/CD is very much a team responsibility. You're not set up for success if you have a single person who's responsible for maintaining and working on CI configuration, making sure that works, because that person can either get fed up and leave, or they can get something from the air that might be circulating around, and I don't know. But yeah, essentially, you really want to spread that knowledge, understanding, at least, so that everyone is at least equipped and enabled to contribute, and in the best scenario, equipped and enabled to actually make sure that they improve the process as well. And this will help you avoid any bottlenecks. So if you're struggling with a long build that's been read for a long time, you can actually spread that knowledge so that, you're kind of avoiding those bottlenecks if someone, is out of commission for a while. And again, I mentioned this earlier, you can use CI/CD configuration as like onboarding aid. Tell someone that joined your team, hey, look through the config. It'll tell you where we're deploying, what we're testing, what we're building, whatever the language is. It's pretty, like, it's YAML, so it's quite understandable to read in English anyway. So yeah, teams are what makes or break a CI/CD process in the end anyway. Lastly, not everything will happen as you might want. And even if you have followed everything to the letter, even if you have all the best practices in place, you sometimes need to be able to turn back time. By that, I obviously mean revert to a nicer time when the build wasn't broken, when the software worked. Because yes, broken deploys, they will happen. And yes, it's just the nature of things, I suppose. And it's our goal to really enable this fast, speedy recovery, not just from a failing build, but also from things we haven't anticipated, we haven't really tested for, we weren't able to test for, and we're able to then kind of revert that with ease. And that's something CI/CD process can really help us. do like efficiently, I suppose. Small changes, again, over large releases, they do help. Again, there was a comment earlier on that it's always the tiny little changes that come and bite me on the bum. And yes, because usually it's because you're not adequately testing them, because you're thinking, yes, this is too small to matter. But yes, if you still go through the same process, same kind of rigorous release process, testing process, and ship smaller changes rather than a feature set of like 100 features long, 20 bug fixes, whatever, 6 months of work at a time, there's way more that can go wrong. And the way to get on top of whatever could go wrong is essentially to plan, to prepare, and to practice for the scenario. Have a checklist in place. Have a list of people that you're going to call, even if it's hopefully you're not calling them at middle of the night, but it does happen, right? It's software breaks, but really have a plan of rollback, plan of how to revert, and practices once in a while. That gets me to my final point. Success with CI/CD is, to me, it means to be free. And yes, CI/CD success is freedom to deliver software on the terms that you choose and not on terms that someone else has kind of imposed on you, or even worse, a tool has imposed on you. It needs to be working for you and allow you to focus on the desired quality and to work at a cadence that works for you, so that you can ultimately adapt to change faster, whether that change comes from your superiors in the organization requesting a new feature, or yes, change that requires you to revert something and go back to how it used to be. It lets you self-document the build, test, deploy processes. So yes, you don't spend days and weeks just making sure that your kind of deployment documentation and checklists are in place, because ultimately, if it's automated, it works. And yes, a human and machine can read it. So that's an ideal scenario. And yes, you recover from any failure with ease. And with that, I will finish my talk. And I hope I have given you some ideas of what you could be doing or what you shouldn't be doing. And hopefully this was useful. Anyway, I'll take any questions that you might have.
Sam, that was great. There's claps and thanks coming through on chat, but
thank you.
No questions yet. Just lots of insights. That's very interesting. To especially the bit about attaching these deployment events to your analytics and your monitoring services, right? So telling Google Analytics, telling your I've literally lost the words for any services beyond Google Analytics, which is probably the least I use from day to day. But anyway, telling those services that version X has now been deployed. So if going forward, if response times are slower or if response times are faster, then that's why.
So pretty much any of these services. Let me actually answer a question that's somewhat related. So it's, does CircleCI provide pre-configured template for common use cases? Yes, that's for example one common use case. What we do is we have the notion of orbs, and actually let me go to the docs and show you how this works. Essentially, I need to stop sharing and reshare this when it's not full screen. Okay, yeah. Okay, here we go. Now you should be able to see it. So maybe make this a little bit bigger. So yes, so we have a notion of orbs, which are like packaged and shareable configuration that you can reuse. And yeah, they come from all sorts, like Node.js, Slack, but also things like external services. For example, I think Datadog has something like Datadog is an example of a service that kind of helps you monitor your applications. And there are orbs that this is Datadog agent. I'm not sure which one works best, but for example, this like is third-party one, which then sends deploy events to Datadog, for example. And that's essentially just like including this as an orb at the top of your configuration, and then you can make sure that you run Datadog/deploy, for example. And that's like a neat way to kind of encapsulate a lot of configuration. There are some that are like third party, some that are developed by us, and some that are actually developed by our partners. And yeah, for each one of those, you actually see you can see what the command is actually doing. So you can go to like command source and see, yes, this is what this script actually automates. So I hope this answers your question, Matthew.
Yeah, I was going to ask as well. Yeah, who maintains those orbs? But you answered
Yeah.
that.
So it really depends. You can actually filter by orb type, which are like certified and partner. And yeah, like if it's got CircleCI / prefix, then they're ours. If it's for example, Cypress is a browser testing tool, it's one of theirs. But yeah, there's like a bunch of others that are kind of developed by our partners as well, and we're constantly adding more. But there's thousands of community developed orbs as well, because we tend to run something we call Orbtoberfest for Hacktoberfest, which is like build open source orbs and we'll send you t-shirts and stuff. So that's an initiative we've been running for a few years, and that's how we got like the scored orbs, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I see you can create private ones as well. So that means you can essentially like reuse chunks of.
Yeah, exactly. So private orbs,
I was going to ask.
Currently they're only available for the scale plan. So if you're like an enterprise, that's like a fancy feature that you get. But yeah, if you have like, for example, deployment, complex deployment configuration, or like build configurations or something like that, that you might rely on, you can use private orbs for that. And that way they're not accessible to anyone, at least, and people can't really see your source.
Yeah.
Question from the YouTubes from Alexio. Any recommendations of reading materials to get more insights regarding planning a pipeline?
Good question. So reading materials for planning pipelines. So the docs are probably the best place to go, as usual. There is like, every feature, every best practice. We do have things for like cookbooks for. Actually, let me reshare the screen again. So this is like, for example, in the docs, you have cookbooks for optimization, which kind of help you plan this better. And there's also obviously the CircleCI blog, which has all sorts of content in there. But yeah, there are some like hardcore topics for like best practices, as well as like very beginner oriented tutorials for kind of getting to use various technologies. The next one or last thing I want to mention is our forum, which is called discuss.circleci.com, which is where like any kind of more kind of advanced-ish or like unique topics can be asked and or have been answered as well. So that's the forum as well. So that's super useful, and for many things as well.
Well, it's about now I make the usual shout out to the YouTubers and say right now one should get one's questions in before we close for a bit of a private Zoom session. Oh, Matt,
I've got one more question.
Go on. No, go on.
I don't like to bring it up, but it seems very similar to GitHub Actions style of how the like YAML configuration and the ability to plug into other providers. So are there any pros and cons to picking between GitHub Actions and CircleCI? Or are they quite similar?
So GitHub Actions is not specializing in the CI/CD aspect of things. That's like that's our main like pro, I suppose, for CircleCI. If you're looking for a CI/CD tool, we have several hundred engineers just working on making that better constantly, and everything that's kind of falls under that kind of soon also software releasing process as well. Whereas GitHub Actions we see it as more like a DSL on top of whatever happens on GitHub, because it's not just build and deploy things. Sure, they do have this feature, and but they also do like issue automation, that kind of stuff that is super valuable and like great feature on top of GitHub, but it's not like a purebred CI/CD tool like CircleCI is. And I mean, GitHub created GitHub Actions in order to kind of answer some of their competitors that had this CI/CD features. But again, like we're kind of playing in just the CI/CD league of our own, if you will.
Yeah, makes sense. It all sounds exciting to me because I've been using Jenkins a lot recently, and not fun.
Oh dear, sorry, I just shouldn't laugh. I can just appreciate the pain. It's a fabulous piece of software, but there's pain involved.
Jenkins is great. I mean, it's the only open source tool out there, and it's serving so many organizations really well. I personally prefer the SaaS approach. So just because I really don't like managing and maintaining my own servers, but that's like a personal approach. Again, like it's an organization's choice. Like, you want to maintain this, you have the ability, you have the people and time to maintain something like that. Absolutely, go ahead. And my personal kind of agenda is I want to see as many folks using CI/CD as possible, and that's it. Like, if you use CircleCI, even better. But this is all about success in general with CI/CD.
All right. I'm going to make that call for a third time. You see, Bernard missed the talk today. You can obviously catch up on the YouTubes if you haven't already wound it all the way back, like apparently 52 other people have done already. So we are going to wave goodbye to the YouTubers.
Goodbye, YouTubers.
In a few moments. If you have any further questions, Put them in the Discord. Zan has joined. He's joined the Discord today, actually. So yeah, put them in the Discord. I'm sure he'll answer them. Thank you very much. Oh, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell button. I think that's what we're meant to say at the end of the YouTube. So I've said it now.
Smash that bell button.
Smash that bell button. Right, bye-bye. Push the button.